Ahoj, tak všichni online?
Já jo.
Taky.
A ty, babi?
Babi,
Musíš tam na to kliknout. Ne na to
babi,
druhý.
musíš tam na tu ikonku.
Sluchátko, babi.
Jeden svět, festival dokumentárních filmů o lidských právech. 10. května až 6. června Jeden svět CZ. Pořádá Člověk v tísni.
2, 1.
Ahoj a hezký večer všem.
Hello and good evening, our viewers. It is the 23rd edition of the International Human Rights Documentary Film Festival One World, organized by people in need. We just seen Coded Bias, and we will talk with Meredith Broussard, professor of data journalism at the Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute within the New York University. You can ask also questions using the Slido application or Facebook and YouTube. So I hope that Meredith can hear us nice and clear, and we can see her. Hello, hi.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Díky, že jsi ho přijala.
Thanks for coming.
K tomu filmu a k tomu, co jsme vlastně teď viděli.
Before we'll talk about the documentary itself, let us talk about the topic and how you discovered the topic, because you wrote the book called Artificial Intelligence, and in one interview you said that in your academic research you focus on how journalists work with artificial intelligence, and you also studied computer science. You said that you left this field because of the biases that are all over the field of computer science. So is it that you have personal experience with techno-chauvinism? So can you talk more about the whole topic and how you discovered it yourself?
Sure. I started my career as a computer scientist, and I quit to become a journalist. The reason that I left computer science was because I experienced racism, I experienced sexism, I experienced all of the things that traditionally cause women to leave STEM fields. However, I came back to computer science as a data journalist. And so what I do now is I build artificial intelligence systems in order to perform investigative reporting. But I also do a lot of explaining what artificial intelligence is and isn't, because in order to understand how algorithms are being used to make decisions on our behalf and to understand why this is a problem, people need to understand what artificial intelligence is. And as I point out in the film, there's a lot of confusion between the Hollywood images of AI and what is real about AI. So AI is just math, but we tend to think about AI as magic. It's a problem when people use magical thinking, because then things get very confused. And AI is a problem when it is used in things like policing. So as we see in Coded Bias, the use of AI-based facial recognition techniques leads to all kinds of wrongful discrimination.
You spoke about the fact that artificial intelligence is understood quite differently than what Hollywood shows us. So can you tell us more about the influence of sci-fi, science fiction versus the scientific understanding of this topic? In one podcast, you said that you like science fiction, and can you maybe compare those two fields?
Yeah, I love science fiction. It is really fun it's fun to imagine the possibilities for technology. It's fun to imagine alternate worlds. And when you watch a movie like Her, where they build an android, and the android seems to be just like a human, it's so fun to imagine that, but it's important not to get confused about what is imaginary and what's real. So we're not going to have killer robots taking over the world anytime soon. We're not going to have a computer apocalypse. We're not going to have the singularity where, you know, humans and machines merge. You're never going to be able to upload your consciousness into a future robot body. All of that stuff is very fun to talk about, but it's not real. And it's a little absurd.
You said, you talked about the film Her. Why humanoid robots are women so often?
Well, sexism, I think, is the simple answer. One of the things that you notice about the names given to computer personas is the programs that serve are labeled as women. So like Siri, Cortana, Alexa are all female names. But the computers that are supposed to be really smart and powerful end up with male names. So Deep Blue, the chess playing computer, is male. IBM's Watson is coded as male. So the unconscious bias, or maybe conscious bias, of Silicon Valley is showing through in the even in something like the names that people select to personify technology. It's also important to talk about the way that we personify technology. One of the things that humans do is we attribute human-like characteristics to non-human things. So like I look at my dog and I think, oh, my dog is thinking about me. And, you know, my dog understands me. My dog does not really understand me, but I imagine that my dog understands me. And we do the same thing with technology. We look at playlists that are programmed by algorithms on Spotify and we think, oh, the algorithm really knows me. It really has picked out the songs that are going to exactly fit my mood. And no, that's not true. The computer knows nothing about your mood. It's just about similarity. And it's a really good guess based on a lot of data because human beings are all pretty similar. So it's important not to personify technology too much. We need to not romanticize technology. We need to not imagine that, you know, that we have an emotional attachment to our phones or that we can't live without our laptop. I mean, those are just not healthy things to think.
No, stejně to tak myslím si většina z nás docela.
I think that we do it quite often, that our telephone is the closest object or entity, and sometimes it becomes our house. Now let us look at the film. After watching it, I feel that the film makes it a bit easier for us to get around all those technologies and those types. It also draws attention to some very important issues, such as that always there is a person or a group of persons behind the technology, meaning that never it can be entirely just and equal. And what also the film showed me was that, thanks to it, I am more comfortable saying, no, I don't like this or that, and I don't want to be monitored and surveilled in this way. So where have we moved since the time the film was shot, from that moment to now? Are there any progress made?
Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that. Because one of the things that I really hope is that after seeing this film, people will feel empowered to say no to surveillance, to tracking technology. And I want people to feel like they have more agency, like they're in charge of their own lives in the digital sphere. The film has, or Joy's work specifically, covered in the film, has had an enormous amount of impact. The big tech companies have said that they will halt development of facial recognition for policing. Amazon said that it would pause development of facial recognition for policing for a year. That year is up next month. They really should call a halt to it, but we'll see what happens. And it's an example of how one person's work can make a big difference.
Co se může dít dál potom, co vlastně...
What can we expect next when the time set by Amazon runs out?
I mean, I hope that Amazon decides not to develop more facial recognition applications for policing. We also, as a result of Joy's work, have a lot more awareness of how facial recognition technology can be biased. And her work was launched into a larger conversation about the role of algorithms in society and the way that algorithms are increasingly being used to make decisions on our behalf, and how those decisions are often discriminatory. One way to think about it, and this is covered in the film, one way to think about it is to think about the fact that data reflects the world as it is now. And we know that there are problems in the world. We know there is racism in the world. We know there is sexism in the world. And so what data shows us is it shows us the world with all of its flaws. And then if we make automated systems, AI systems that are based on this data, what the AI is going to do is it's going to say, okay, we're going to find the patterns in the data and we're going to reproduce them. So the AI system is going to reproduce all of the existing problems in the world, including racism, sexism, and all of the other isms. And this is how these systems work. There's an expression, garbage in, garbage out. It's very relevant whenever you're making an automated system. And lots of people think, well, maybe the answer is let's use better data. Let's use more unbiased data. But the thing is, there isn't more unbiased data. There's just the world as it is now. And what we want is we want to get closer to the world as it should be. One of the things that Shalini says is that we have a moonshot moment right now. We have an opportunity to make a big difference in understanding that data rights are civil rights. And we have an opportunity to go forward as a society making better choices about AI, and in many cases not using AI at all.
Mě vlastně ještě napadá, že už jsem slyšela srovnání coded bias s filmem Social Dilemma.
Brings me to the fact that I heard about a comparison of your movie Coded Bias with the film Social Dilemma. And I think that Coded Bias looked into
stáli v čele různých firm, které se právě na tomto sledování algoritmů podílejí.
Social Dilemma actually looked into people who developed many of these applications and who work in these tech companies, whereas coded bias involves the people who are discriminated. So what is the comparison or the difference?
I did a panel with the people who made the social dilemma, and it's very interesting to watch the films next to each other. If people are watching both films, I'd be really curious to hear on Twitter how you're comparing the films to each other. If you notice, most of the people most of the experts interviewed in the social dilemma are white, and that reflects the composition of Silicon Valley overall. Silicon Valley has a race problem. Big tech has a race problem. So one of the important things that coded bias does is it opens up the conversation to women, to people of color, and you can see how including more voices enriches the conversation. And the mainstream conversation about big tech has really been dominated by a very homogeneous group of people. And so it's great that coded bias is broadening the conversation.
Když se krátce ještě vrátíme, než přejdeme na dotazy z publika od diváků a divaček k face recognition, tak jedna z protagonistek ve filmu říká, že hlavní rozdíl mezi Čínou a USA
says that the main difference between the US and China is that China is being transparent about the way it surveys
v západní Evropě, v USA a podobně. K čemu chceme směřovat? Protože i když budeme řekněme rozpoznávaní dobře nebo lépe, tak někdo pořád zůstane diskriminovaný nebo přinejmenším sledovaný.
Facial recognition systems, because there will always be someone who is surveilled.
Yeah, that scene in the movie where the girl in China is going around and using facial recognition and saying, "Oh, I like it because it's so convenient." That scene, it's like a little Black Mirror episode inside the film, right? It suggests this is a potential future, and it's not really a future that I want. I'm very encouraged by the new proposed EU legislation on AI. What this legislation says is that AI systems will be categorized as high risk and low risk, and the high risk systems will be regulated, will be monitored by an AI authority, and facial recognition systems will be considered high risk and will be highly regulated, and you'll not be able to use them without explicit authorization and for a good reason. I think this is a step in the right direction. For a very long time, there's been this reluctance to regulate. There's been this idea that Silicon Valley would regulate itself, and that has not worked. We gave it a try, it failed. So we need more regulation by the government. We need more government oversight. We need to stop imagining that we can write things once and run them anywhere, because socio-technical systems are context specific. So the new proposed EU regulation is really a step in the right direction. It may need some modifications, who knows, but I think we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We have to do something.
Teď bych se podívala tady na dotaz od diváka nebo divačky. Kdyby vám AI mohla splnit jedno přání, víte, že by zvládla, jaké by to bylo?
One wish for you to come true, what wish would it be?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, first, I would wish for more wishes, of course. And I would also like for people to understand what AI is and what AI is not. And I would like for AI to actually help us to get to a better world instead of AI just reproducing inequality that exists in the world right now. And I would also like to use AI to eliminate economic inequality.
Přesně k tomu se vlastně tady váže, k tomu, co teď říkáš, k té poslední věci. Další otázka z publika.
Which is mentioned in another question.
Nebo divačka, máte nějakou představu, jak bychom k AI
do you have an idea about how to approach AI in order to make it serve us and not endanger us?
There are some very, very promising developments. I would say two things are most exciting to me, the field of fairness, accountability, and transparency, and also the field of public interest technology. So public interest technology is just what it sounds like. It's making technology in the public interest. Sometimes it's about making better government technology so that people have easier and more seamless interactions with the government. Other times, public interest technology is about investigating algorithms and uncovering injustice. So in Coded Bias, one of the things that Joy Buolamwini is doing is she's auditing the facial recognition algorithms. She's saying these algorithms discriminate, and she's enacting positive change. This is the best example of what this is an excellent example of what is possible with public interest technology when we're thinking about how can technology serve the public good. So public interest technology is one realm that I think is really exciting. And I'm very excited about algorithmic auditing in general. And so this brings us to the field of fairness, accountability, and transparency. The discipline of computer science, since about 2017, 2018, has been grappling with ideas of what does it look like to make a computer program that is fair. Julia Angwin had a very famous investigation called Machine Bias for ProPublica in the US, where she discovered that there was an algorithm that was being used to predict whether people would commit a crime in the future. And this algorithm was biased against Black people. And in fact, mathematically, there's no way for this algorithm to be fair. So this kicked off a big conversation inside computer science. And now we have this field called FACT, or Fairness, Accountability, and Transparency. There's a big conference every year and lots of spin-off conferences. And this is the discipline of looking at what can we do mathematically or computationally in order to make our decision-making systems more fair. So those are the two things that I'm most excited about on the technical side. On the social side, we have organizations like the Algorithmic Justice League, Joy's organization. If you go to codedbias.com, take action, or ajl.org, take action. There's a list of what can you do to get involved to bring about data justice and to advocate against surveillance algorithms that are discriminating against people. So there are lots of great opportunities for learning more about the problem and for really doing something concrete to make the world better.
K tomu, co vlastně každý můžeme konkrétně udělat.
About our individual actions, that's a topic we will elaborate or we'll talk more about. But now I would like to look at the following. Can you recommend some summarizing source, information source, be it a website or a book that could be a nice source of information on this topic?
Well, I have a book called Artificial Unintelligence, How Computers Misunderstand the World, that I think is a really great starting point for understanding AI. One of the things that I write about is data journalism and how data journalism can help us understand algorithmic systems and understand computational decision-making in general. because we can use the kind of investigative tools of journalism and apply them to computational systems and then understand what's going on inside the black box. A couple other books and organizations that I would recommend. Sophia Noble, who's featured in the film, has a book called Algorithms of Oppression. Kathy O'Neill, who's featured in the film, has a book called Weapons of Math Destruction. Virginia Eubanks has a book, Automating Inequality. Zainab Tufekci's book, Twitter and Tear Gas. Reading through the reading list of people in coded bias is a great starting point. I also like an organization in the US called Data for Black Lives, which has a lot of resources and also policy recommendations.
I hope that we'll have a grant to translate all those books into Czech. That's another question, actually. He says that AI is difficult to understand, but apparently it regards everyone. How could this topic be made more accessible to the public?
One of the things that I tell my students in the classroom is that I'm not going to lie that AI is hard, but this is one of the things we do in life. We do hard things. Not everything is easy to understand. Not everything can be explained in 280 characters, and that's okay. So if you don't understand AI at first, you're very normal. You need to work at it a little bit. And you should also know that that computational topics are often communicated as being impossible to understand as a gatekeeping method. So sometimes people are telling you, oh, this is too hard, you wouldn't understand it, so that you won't ask questions. So if anybody says, oh, this is too hard, you won't understand it, know that they're probably trying to hide something, and you should ask more questions. Facial recognition technology, for example, it's kind of hard to understand computer vision, but there are ways that you can make it easier, and there are more accessible entry points. In Ruha Benjamin's book, Race After Technology, there's a really good explanation of the way that film technology developed. And film technology is the precursor to computer vision technology. And Ruha Benjamin also writes about how the origins of film technology are racist. Darker skin looked muddy on color photos until the 1970s, when Kodak decided that it would make the browns look better. But Kodak made that decision not because they wanted to show people of color as being more beautiful, but because furniture manufacturers complained that walnut and mahogany furniture looked muddy in the photo catalogs. So this is what we're starting with. So it's hardly surprising that there's racism all the way down that's perpetuated in computer vision technology. But once we understand what's going on and we understand the different layers, then we can think forward and we can build things differently. For example, we can take inspiration from Joy in the way that she made a more inclusive data set as a result of her gender shades project. She saw that facial recognition systems were being trained on mostly pale males, and she said, we need a data set that includes people of a wider range of skin tones. And she made that data set, which is great. a lot of people will look at that and say, oh, well, we'll just use that data set and make the facial recognition systems work better on darker skinned people, and that's the fix. Joy's work is so interesting because she goes one step further and says, no, that's not the fix. We should A, fix the data set, and B, we should not use facial recognition in policing because these systems are disproportionately weaponized against communities of color. So the fix is, let's not use facial recognition in policing at all.
Teď vlastně docela obecná věc, ale říkám si, že naše
I have a general question now, because this debate can be viewed via YouTube or Facebook. So let us talk about social networks. Do you think that their operation should be changed in terms of their approach to their users, and should it be regulated from outside, from the outside or from the inside? Can companies such as Facebook accept those regulations, or they're likely not to do so?
All right, so this is a very big question. I don't know if I can answer it in a small amount of time, but I will try. So I think this is a very complicated issue. I think that, yes, social media companies need more regulation. I think that self-regulation has not worked. We tried it, it didn't work. We need to do something different. I am also sympathetic to the technical complexity of the problem. One of the things that I write about in Artificial Unintelligence is the way that popular is used as a proxy for good. So the recommendation algorithms that power what gets recommended to you on social media cannot autonomously determine what is good. They're not human, they're machines. Like, it's just math under the hood, and math cannot tell you what's good. Math can tell you mathematical answers. So the programmers had to pick something that was a proxy for good, and they picked popularity. So things that are popular: puppies, birthdays, engagements, kids' Halloween pictures, great. Like, those things, unquestionably popular, unquestionably good. There are lots of things in the world that are popular, but not good, like racism, okay? And so because the automated system is looking for popular, it's not looking for good, it picks up, or it counts, racist or anti-Semitic speech as being popular in the same way that it counts a puppy picture as being popular. And that's a problem. The larger problem is that people imagine that it's going to be possible to solve the problem with an algorithm alone. And it's not. You need a human in the loop. There is a phenomenon called ghost work, where tech companies are actually using human workers, and they are camouflaging the human workers, or making it seem like the computer is doing the work. This is happening a lot with social media companies. When you flag a piece of content as being inappropriate, you think that it goes to an algorithm. And in fact, it does, but most of the content actually gets kicked over to a human being who has to look at it and evaluate whether it's appropriate or inappropriate. So if you're following the Facebook Oversight Board, the Facebook Oversight Board is supposed to be this body that is the final word on whether a particular piece of content is appropriate or not appropriate. And so I think the big flaw is imagining that it's possible to write an AI that's going to moderate the entire digital sphere. And it's simply not possible. And it's okay that that's not possible, but we need to admit that so that we can design healthier systems that that do not spread anti-Semitism or spread hate.
No jasně, a to vlastně dává smysl I v tom, že...
Yes, and also it makes sense because the code is written by a human being. Always it is a human being behind. What about our individual accountability or responsibility? Should we, on an individual level, try to minimize our digital footprint?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's a little bit like recycling. Recycling is very important. Everybody should recycle. You know, you should reduce, you should reuse, you should recycle. You know, buying secondhand, it's a great thing. Like reducing the amount of stuff that you print, it's great. All these things are important, but the biggest offenders are much larger than us. So my environmental footprint individually is not as big as say, you know, multinational corporations that have hundreds of office buildings where they're not recycling. Right? So the individual's actions matter, but it's also important that we make structural changes. So individuals adjusting their social media habits is important, but it's also really important that we have policy changes, that we have regulation so that we solve the problem for everybody and we do it all at once instead of pushing all the responsibility onto the user.
Přesně tahleta souvislost,
yes,
přesně tahleta souvislost s klimatickou krizí nebo obecně
this parallel with the climate topic also came to my mind, so it was funny to hear it in this context. We have a reaction from one of the viewers who really loved the film, and now, Meredith, what are your future plans now?
I am working on a new book. It is about race and technology and sexism and ableism. And I'm trying to look at the question, how can we make technology that is accessible, that is anti-racist, that is accessible to everyone, truly accessible to everyone. But I don't really have answers yet because I haven't finished writing the book yet. It should be out in 2023.
Přesně na to jsem se vlastně chtěla zeptat, jak se to dá udělat, ale...
I wanted to ask about the way it can be done, but we will have to wait until 2023.
Yes, I should have it figured out by then.
Moc ti děkuju, že jsi udělala čas.
Thanks a lot
for
devoting your time.
And I
wonder, when you're watching Black Mirror, and there are some scenes that actually seem to us quite realistic. What do you think when watching these scenes? Maybe you think that this is already happening, or only we don't know?
I think if you ask my husband what it's like to watch Black Mirror with me, he will laugh because I definitely yell at the television a lot. That doesn't mean I stop watching it though. I just yell. But thank you so much for this great conversation. It was really an honor. And I'm so glad that people like the film.
Já ti taky moc děkuji.
Thanks a lot too.
Čas na debatu. Děkuji všem, že posílali super dotazy.
And thank you to the audience for your questions. Thank you to all the viewers and the support from the US Embassy, which made it possible for us to see this movie. Thanks a lot again, and have a nice evening.
Thank you. Good night.